The blow did not come with shouting, headlines, or a public speech. It came quietly, behind a closed palace door, through a single revision to an internal royal military honors board. And when Harry's name disappeared from the ceremonial roll, the silence around it became louder than any announcement. This was not just an administrative decision. It was a brother removing a brother from one of the last symbols that still tied him to royal duty. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Harry stared at the page as if the ink itself had turned against him. His name had once sat there with quiet pride, tied to service, sacrifice, and the military life that had given him purpose beyond palace walls. Now the space felt colder than a public insult. The Royal Military Honors Board, a palace record that connects royal figures to ceremonial military recognitions and symbolic service roles, was never just a list inside the household. It carried memory. It carried duty. It told soldiers, veterans, and courtiers who still stood close to the crown's armed traditions. And William had approved the revision that removed the Duke from that place. The prince did not celebrate it. He stood over the finalized papers with the stillness of a man who knew the decision would wound more than one person. William understood why the board mattered. Because military honor inside the monarchy is not decoration. It is a public sign of trust between the royal family and the forces who serve under the crown's name. He also understood why Harry would feel betrayed. The future king had not erased a stranger. He had signed away a symbol from his own brother's life. Charles read the file before the news reached Harry, and the king said nothing for a long moment. He knew the decision had moved through William's authority, not as an act of rage, but as a hard line drawn around royal duty. Charles could have softened it. The monarch could have delayed it. Instead, he allowed the prince's judgment to stand, and that silence gave the removal its true weight. A senior aide noticed the missing entry when the revised ceremonial copy began moving through the palace. The aide stopped mid-sentence, looked again, and understood what no one had announced aloud. Harry had not been warned by headline. He had been blindsided by absence. The board had changed, the room had changed, and the old bond between the brothers had changed with it. And before Harry can understand why William made the move, the story turns toward the people whose private wounds made this decision unavoidable. For Harry, military identity was never decoration. It was refuge, purpose, pride, and proof that he could stand apart from palace politics while still serving something larger than himself. For William, the same uniform meant continuity, command, and the future weight of the crown. When those meanings collided, the honors board became the battlefield neither brother wanted, but both were forced to enter. Harry felt the wound in a place palace language could not reach. Titles had been challenged before. Invitations had been withdrawn before. Public affection had shifted before. But the military part of his life had always felt different, almost untouchable, because it belonged to something deeper than royal rank. It belonged to long days of discipline, danger, loyalty, and the fierce need to prove himself beyond the shadow of birth. When the revised board reached him, he did not only see a missing name. He saw a part of himself being judged by the family he once believed understood that service best. William carried a different burden, and that made the decision even more painful. As heir, he was not simply protecting family feeling. He was guarding the meaning of royal military recognition itself. If ceremonial honor remained attached to someone no longer standing inside the working structure of the crown, then every future role could be questioned. Every salute, every appointment, every symbolic link between palace and armed forces could begin to look personal instead of principled. The prince knew this. Catherine knew it too, and when William spoke with her privately, his words came slowly, as though each one had been pulled from an old wound. He admitted the decision did not feel like discipline, it felt like cutting the final thread. Harry stood alone after the news settled, his thumb moving across an old military photograph, as sadness hardened into disbelief. The image reminded him of a life where purpose had felt clear, where service had given him identity, when palace life had given him pressure. That was why the removal landed with such force. It did not erase what he had done, but it changed how the crown chose to hold his name in its present memory. Charles had not been outside the circle. The king read the file in silence. then placed it down without protest, allowing William's authority to stand. That silence mattered because it told everyone the decision had moved beyond brotherly tension. Camilla sensed it immediately. She watched the palace mood shift and understood that this was not merely a family disagreement. It was a succession-era decision wrapped in military symbolism, and once that meaning became clear, there was no easy way back. Yet the deepest reason for the removal does not begin with the board itself, but with one specific moment that changed William's view of Harry forever. To understand why William finally acted, the documentary must return to the hidden incident that turned private frustration into a royal line of consequence. Every royal rupture has a moment people later call the beginning. Not the first argument, not the first headline, the moment of no return. For William, that moment came during a private military remembrance reception at Windsor, when Harry's absence from one solemn tribute left an empty space that everyone noticed and no one dared explain. From that night forward, William stopped seeing the honors issue as emotional. He saw it as constitutional. William felt the shift before anyone dared name it. The Windsor Military Remembrance Reception had been arranged as a private gathering of remembrance, a palace event meant to honor fallen servicemen connected to royal patronage. In simple terms, royal patronage means the official support a royal figure gives to a military group, charity, or cause, turning private respect into public duty. Charles had wanted the reception to feel like a careful bridge between wounded family members, a way for both brothers to be connected through shared respect, even if they could not stand side by side. But Harry's reserved place remained empty, and that emptiness carried more weight than any speech in the room. William watched that vacant chair during the tribute and tightened his jaw. He was not only angry, he was humiliated in front of veterans who expected the royal family to offer steadiness when memory demanded it. The prince knew Harry's military past mattered deeply, but he also knew public honor could not survive if it appeared detached from royal obligation. That was why the moment cut so sharply. One brother saw absence as circumstance. The other saw it as a crack in the crown's promise. Harry later learned how the palace had read the moment, and frustration rose in him like a second betrayal. He believed a private scheduling conflict had been turned into a loyalty test, then sharpened into evidence against him. To Harry, the reception should never have become a judgment of his service. To William, the chair had spoken louder than any explanation that followed. That difference became dangerous, because neither man was arguing about one evening anymore. They were arguing about what duty meant after separation. A palace aide quietly recorded the empty seat incident in a briefing note, and that note began to move through the system with deadly calm. Weeks later, Charles read it and underlined the phrase, "symbolic inconsistency," a cold expression for a deeply personal wound. The king understood the meaning immediately. The monarchy could remember Harry's courage, but it could not keep presenting him as part of a living military structure if his presence could no longer be relied upon when ceremony demanded unity. That note became the hidden foundation beneath the Honors Board decision. It turned sadness into policy, it turned disappointment into consequence, and it pushed William toward a choice he could delay, but not escape. But the old wound becomes explosive only when Harry and William finally face each other without speeches, aids, or ceremonial language to protect them. And when the brothers are brought into the same room, the Honors Board stops being a document and becomes a confrontation years in the making. The confrontation begins with restraint, which makes it more devastating. No raised voices at first, no dramatic entrance. Just two brothers in a private room, a closed door, and a file placed between them like evidence in a trial neither wanted to attend. Harry arrives looking wounded. William waits looking resolved. And in that silence, the monarchy's cold machinery meets the last raw nerve of a family. Harry knew the meeting was not ordinary the moment William asked for no aids at first. That choice mattered. It meant the decision would not be softened by official wording or delivered through careful palace hands. The prince wanted his brother to hear it from him, directly, before anyone else could reshape the meaning. The Honors Board file sat between them, and the revised page made every explanation feel smaller. The Royal Military Honors Board, in plain terms, was the internal record linking royal figures to ceremonial military recognition. Harry understood that once his name vanished from it, the palace was not merely changing a document, it was changing how the crown chose to remember him in the present. Harry pushed the paper back across the table. His voice stayed controlled, but the hurt beneath it was impossible to hide. He asked whether his years of service now meant nothing, whether the long discipline, the danger, the loyalty, and the sacrifice had all become inconvenient because he no longer fit the palace's preferred shape. For him, the question was not policy, it was identity. The uniform had given him something the monarchy never could, a place where he was judged by courage, not birth order. William did not look away. That made the answer colder, even though the pain in it was real. The prince told him the issue was not courage. It was public duty, it was consistency, it was the impossibility of honor without responsibility. William knew those words would land like a verdict, but he also knew the board could not become a memorial to what Harry used to be while ignoring what he had chosen not to remain. The future king was not denying the past. He was refusing to let the past overrule the structure of the crown. Harry then understood the deeper wound. William had not merely agreed with the removal, he had guided it, shaped it, and allowed the palace to carry it out quietly. That truth changed the air between them. The brother who once stood beside him had become the authority deciding where his name belonged. William felt the break as soon as Harry's expression shifted. The decision had been made to protect the monarchy, but in that room it looked like betrayal. Harry saw a final thread being cut. The prince saw a necessary line being drawn, and between those two truths, neither brother found comfort. Yet the confrontation leaves one question hanging in the room. Who truly had the power to remove Harry, and why did Charles allow William to use it? That question pulls the story behind the family argument and into the quiet structure of power that made William's decision final. Power inside the monarchy rarely announces itself. It appears in who receives the file first, who is asked for final approval, and whose silence becomes permission. In this decision, Charles remained king, but William became the force that moved the machinery. The removal of Harry's name revealed something larger than family discipline. It showed the palace beginning to operate around the future monarch's judgment. Charles understood the danger of silence, yet he allowed it to speak for him. The final recommendation sat before him with the kind of weight no crown could make lighter. A Royal Military Honors Review, in simple terms, is an internal examination of which royal figures should remain connected to ceremonial military recognition and public service symbolism. It mattered because those roles are not only about family pride. They are about whether the monarchy can ask soldiers to respect its symbols, while keeping those symbols clear, current, and believable. Charles knew Harry's service could never be denied, but he also knew William was now shaping the future language of duty. The king removed his glasses and sat motionless. His sadness showed what his words did not. Approval can look powerful from the outside, but inside that room, it felt like surrender. Charles was not only watching a file move forward, he was watching one son authorize a decision that would wound another son in the one place Harry still considered sacred. Yet the monarch did not stop it, because stopping it would have meant telling William that future credibility mattered less than present pain. William stood nearby, quiet and tense, carrying a different kind of burden. The prince had gained influence, but not relief. His growing authority over royal military representation came from his role as heir, the person expected to protect the crown's next chapter before he ever wears it. That is why the decision mattered beyond Harry. If William allowed symbolic honors to remain attached to unresolved personal history, every future appointment could look like sentiment instead of service. Every ceremonial role could lose some of its force. A handwritten note beside the file made the logic brutally clear. Ceremonial military honors must reflect active representation, not unresolved personal history. The words were cold, but their impact was deeply human. They turned years of brotherhood, duty, resentment, and public fracture into one sharp principle. William saw the sentence and understood why the palace needed it. Charles saw the same sentence and understood what it would cost. Catherine later found William alone after the meeting, his hand resting near the file. She did not need him to explain much. The future king had made a decision he would never celebrate, and that quiet truth revealed the cruelty of power. William had protected the institution, but the protection had pulled him further from the brother he once defended. But once the palace machinery moves, the consequences do not stay private. Harry's new reality begins to spread through every room connected to royal service. And as the revised board reaches the people who serve the crown, Harry feels the first cold edge of what removal truly means. The fallout begins not with a speech, but with absence. A space where Harry's name used to be. A line removed. A ceremonial reference rewritten. Inside the palace, staff understand instantly that this is not clerical. It is symbolic exile from a world Harry once considered sacred. Outside the room, no one hears the paper move. Inside it, an identity is being quietly dismantled. Harry received the second confirmation with a stillness that frightened even those around him. The first shock had felt almost unreal, like a mistake that might still be corrected if someone brave enough spoke the truth. But the formal note ended that hope. It confirmed the revised honors board had begun circulating among select royal offices, moving from private decision into practical reality. A ceremonial reference, in plain language, is the official wording used to place a royal figure within public or private events linked to tradition, duty, or remembrance. That mattered because once the wording changed, Harry was not simply absent from a page. He was being repositioned in the crown's memory. Harry sat back without speaking. Anger had carried him through the first hours, but grief now moved in its place. He understood what the careful language was trying to hide. The palace could still say his service was respected. It could still praise his courage in the past. But the living connection, the current royal recognition, the quiet institutional embrace of his military identity had been pulled away. For a man who had lost so much public ground already, this felt like a private room being emptied while he was still standing inside it. Charles heard that Harry had seen the revised version, and the king closed his eyes. He did not defend the choice aloud. He did not reverse it. That silence was its own pain. Charles knew why William had acted, but he also knew why Harry would feel abandoned. The monarch had spent years trying to hold broken pieces together, yet this decision proved that some fractures no longer answered to a father's wish. William received the warning before the palace prepared any public explanation. A trusted official told the prince that once the change became known, the story would not be framed as policy, duty, or ceremonial order. It would be framed as brother against brother. William understood the danger immediately. The palace had also quietly updated internal seating plans and future remembrance references, proving the removal was not symbolic only. It would shape where Harry appeared, how he was mentioned, and what space he occupied in royal memory. The decision now had movement. It had consequences. It had a path beyond the file. Yet just when the rupture seemed impossible to soften, something shifted. Not in policy, not in the board. In the space between two brothers who had both lost more than they could admit. The turning point arrives away from offices and titles. In a stripped-down conversation where family finally speaks louder than protocol. For once, there is no board, no palace note, no secretary waiting outside, with language polished for history. There is only William and Harry, standing near a window after the official meeting has ended, both exhausted by the weight of what has happened. The crown has spoken through William. But in this private moment, the brother beneath the title finally appears. Harry remained behind, because walking away would have made the wound feel final. The formal confrontation had ended, the official words had been spoken, and the honors decision still stood. Yet something in him refused to leave with only palace language ringing in his ears. William returned without aides, and that choice changed the air between them. The Royal Military Honors Board, in simple terms, was the internal record that linked royal figures to ceremonial military recognition. And Harry already knew his place on it was gone. But now the question was no longer just what had been removed. It was whether anything human remained beneath the decision. William spoke first, and the words came with unusual difficulty. The prince admitted that removing Harry's name had been one of the hardest choices of his life. Not because he doubted his brother's courage, not because he had forgotten the years of service, the discipline, the danger, or the pride Harry had carried from the military into every broken part of his public identity. William said the problem was simpler and far crueler. He could not separate honor from duty. If the crown continued to give living recognition without living responsibility, then the meaning of that recognition would begin to weaken for everyone. Harry listened with visible pain, and for once, the anger did not rise first. Grief did. He said quietly that the uniform was the one part of his life he thought no one could take from him. That sentence cut through the room because it exposed the heart of the entire rupture. Harry was not asking to be restored to palace control. He was asking why service had to be weighed against family fracture, why the thing he earned beyond birth had now been judged through the lens of royal obedience. William then revealed what Harry had not known. The prince had argued against harsher measures. He had stopped the palace from erasing broader references to Harry's service history beyond the honors board. That revelation did not heal the wound, but it changed its shape. Harry realized the decision was both punishment and protection, a removal from current royal recognition, but not a total destruction of his military legacy. The brothers stood inside that painful truth, closer than enemies and farther than family should ever be. William had not reversed the decision. Harry had not forgiven it. But both men understood, at last, what had truly been lost. Yet private understanding cannot stop public judgment, and once the revised board becomes known, the monarchy must face the country's reaction. What was whispered in palace rooms now breaks into public view, where one missing name becomes the image everyone debates. By morning, the private decision belongs to the world. The palace had tried to move quietly, but silence cannot hide an absence that meaningful. One front page captures everything. A black and white image of Harry in uniform beside the headline, "The Honor Erased." At Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathers by the gates, some furious, some solemn, all staring at a monarchy that has disciplined one of its own. Harry saw the headline before anyone could soften it for him. The words were sharp because they turned private pain into public theater. A front page, in this kind of royal crisis, is never just newsprint. It becomes the first public verdict, the image millions carry before any explanation can catch up. Harry turned the paper face down almost instantly, unable to watch his military identity reduced to a debate about palace control. For years, service had been the part of his life that felt earned rather than inherited. Now that same service was being weighed, judged, and argued over as if it belonged to the crown more than to the man who had lived it. William watched the coverage in silence, his expression fixed but not empty. Broadcasters framed the decision as a defining test of his future reign, asking whether the prince had shown necessary discipline or painful coldness. That mattered, because William was no longer being judged only as a brother. He was being measured as the future king, the man expected to protect the monarchy before emotion could weaken it. Every commentator seemed to understand the stakes. If he bent the rules for Harry, critics would call him sentimental. If he enforced them, the world would call him ruthless. Outside Buckingham Palace, the crowd became a living symbol of the split. Veterans quietly defended Harry, speaking of duty, courage, and the years no board could erase. Loyal monarchists answered with a colder argument. William had no choice if royal honor was to mean anything in the future. The palace gates stood between those two truths, and neither side sounded completely wrong. That was what made the moment so powerful. Harry's pain was real. William's burden was real. And the monarchy had placed both brothers inside a decision where compassion and duty could not stand together. Then a broadcaster delivered the line that sharpened the national mood. This is not a question of whether Harry served. It is whether royal honor can survive separation from royal duty. The sentence landed because it said what the palace could not say so plainly. Harry's past was not on trial, but his present place beside the crown was. William knew the public would never fully see the grief behind his choice, only the consequence. And Harry knew the world was now discussing the deepest wound in his identity, as if it were palace property. With the world now watching, the final judgment must move beyond outrage and ask what this decision truly changed inside the monarchy. And when the noise fades, the meaning of William's choice becomes clear. in a way no palace statement could soften. In the end, Harry was not stripped of bravery, memory, or the years he gave in uniform. Those could not be removed by a board, a signature, or a palace file. What William removed was different: the Crown's present endorsement of Harry as a royal military figure. That distinction became the heart of the tragedy. Harry kept his past, William claimed the future, and the monarchy chose order over sentiment. Harry understood the final meaning only when the noise began to fade. The Royal Military Honors Board, in plain language, was the palace record that connected royal figures to ceremonial military recognition, and ceremonial honor meant the Crown's public signal that a person still represented its values in service and duty. That mattered because Harry's personal military past had not been denied, but his present royal military place had been cut away. He could still carry the memory of service. He could still hold the pride of what he had endured. But the monarchy had drawn a hard line between veteran identity and royal representation. Harry placed the front page beside an old service photograph, and the contrast said everything. One image carried the life he had earned through discipline, danger, and brotherhood. The other carried the verdict of a family institution that no longer knew where to place him. He did not rage in that final private moment. He did something quieter and somehow more painful. He walked away from both images, leaving behind the past he could not lose, and the recognition he could not reclaim. William faced his own ending with no triumph at all. The prince closed the honors file and did not smile, because victory over a brother is no victory. He had protected the structure of the crown, but the cost sat heavily on him. Symbolic honors, in simple terms, are royal signs of trust that show who still carries official meaning on behalf of the monarchy. For William, those honors could not become sentimental keepsakes. They had to remain active instruments of institutional trust, or they would lose their power for everyone who served beneath them. Charles accepted the outcome with the sadness of a father who understood that kingship sometimes permits what fatherhood would rather prevent. The king had allowed William's judgment to stand, and that permission changed the family forever. Catherine saw the deeper transformation before others did. She recognized that William had stopped waiting for the monarchy to become easier. The future king had begun making the decisions his crown would demand, even when those decisions left no one untouched. This moment means Harry's royal military chapter has ended, William's authority has hardened, and the monarchy has chosen disciplined continuity over family repair. The story closes not with mystery, but with consequence. One brother stands outside the board. One brother carries the burden of removing him, and the crown moves forward colder, clearer, and less forgiving than before. The decision is complete, the board is changed, and the monarchy has delivered its final message. Honor may remember the past, but the crown belongs to those still bound to its duty. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.